What motion are you doing?
The second one, the mergers and acquisitions.
What did Tobi do?
We believe we beat the third one.
Yeah, we
got the third one.
Then did you guys veto the first motion? Okay. So for some reason on the tab, I still need your speaking position. So can you just give me a
Sure. TJ speaking first, I'm speaking second, and Waiter speaking third. TJ, is that right? Well, it's not really. We'll do this thing where we play for
Surprise. For side off.
Mazen reply and first, Ichiro second.
Then
Yeah, that's second. Ichiro third.
Okay. Alright, great. I think we should be all good then. Hi everyone, welcome. Congratulations for making it to the quarterfinal of Sunway Asian Parliamentary 2023. I'll be your chair. Tobi, I have no preferred pronouns. I'll let my panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Leung. Good luck around. No preferred pronouns as well.
Yeah, Akasyah, no preferred pronouns.
Alright, and if there's anything you want to say about pronouns, POIs, whatever, you can just say it before your speech. Without further ado, on the motion about mergers and acquisitions, yeah.
TJ, no preference for pronouns. Times of crisis and times of uncertainty has always been opportunities for the rich, privileged, and powerful to capitalize off the poor, to consolidate their power further, to put themselves in cement and entrench their power, so that when the crisis is over, they're in a stronger position to continue struggles and systems of oppression and make themselves far better off. That is why we feel that the Federal Trade Commission needs to halt all mergers and acquisitions during times of economic crisis, because it is specifically in this vulnerable period where startups, SMEs, and smaller companies are more vulnerable to being picked up through vertical and horizontal integration, and this makes post-crisis recovery significantly harder. What do we think this looks like outside of the house? I think this basically flat out is just banning all mergers and acquisitions, which means that smaller companies in times of economic crisis, when we talk about market shock and your business plans being affected, they often tend to suffer because of some costs and investors being inside there. Just means that they are no longer allowed to sell out to specific companies, that larger companies are not allowed to buy controlling interest in there, they're not allowed to turn over the board of directors, executive control over these companies, and other stuff like that, which just effectively means that centralized control must still remain with the board of directors in these smaller companies, and all kinds of control executive decisions are made within the company itself. Why do we think the incentives of business owners are more likely to lean towards selling out in the status quo if we don't ban this? I think it's just more likely because it is less risky. Shareholders want to be bought out because in the times of economic recession and crisis, it is not clear how this business is going to transition because your existing business plan is no longer functional, which means that business owners and shareholders want to sell out. Companies want to be taken over, want to be stripped apart for parts, and the people are just being separated everywhere. What changes in our side of the house is the incentives of those leaders, because if you're forced to survive and you're not allowed to sell out, it means that these companies are forced to adapt. It means that tech options, you need to explore things like technological options, like automation, for example. Like a lot of restaurants and food companies and food chains that's transitioned towards food delivery services in the time of the pandemic because people could no longer go to the restaurant and eat. We think that these kinds of innovation, these kinds of transitions in technology, they are more likely to happen outside the house when a merger and acquisition is no longer on the table. I think also in times of crisis that we've seen during COVID, the state is more likely to give you things like support packages for SME, like bailouts, for example, and stimulus packages to keep you alive in the short term, but also to incentivize these kinds of technological innovation and development in order to ensure that the economy can transition throughout this crisis. If there's a question about the setup, I will take it now.
If there is an economic recession right now, doesn't that mean most businesses are likely to fail?
It means that most businesses have to change their business plan, and we are happy to accept that some will fail under our side of the house, but I think the comparative on crisis recovery is worse in your side. Let's look at why mergers are predatory and hurt crisis recovery. One, we've already talked about economic crisis like the COVID recession, like the 08 financial crash, where the changes to the economic structure, existing industries and business models, etc. So because of the lockdown, people could no longer go to businesses or to bars and restaurants, which means that those industries had to adapt in terms of how they reached out to customers and how they made money. They often will couple with things like layoffs at companies that are no longer profitable. There's a lot of uncertainty. They have to lay their workers off because they can't pay them any longer, and consumers are just most hurt as a result. Why do we think that it's specifically during this time where takeovers are very, very predatory? One, because smaller companies are quite weak, especially in the short term. There are three reasons why companies are more likely to opt for a takeover rather than the harder path and the more riskier path of trying to survive or wait out the crisis. One, investors are risk averse. They want to liquidate their shares and sell immediately. They see buyouts as the cheapest option for them to make the most return on their investment, especially because it's not clear whether this company will survive in the future. That is why they will bet on the certainty of this larger company buying them out so that they can maximize the value of their shares. Secondly, investors see more money elsewhere, like food delivery industries, like video conferencing, which is why Zoom saw their share price rise by more than 200% during the pandemic because it was a service that a lot of people demanded, and investors pull their money out from these industries and put them into industries that seem to be more profitable. The third reason is just because these larger companies have the ability to use financial leverage to force companies and to threaten them with things like bankruptcy, right? To collect on debt obligation, to collect on loans early when these smaller companies have no capacity to pay up. In the world where acquisitions are possible, larger companies use this threat of violence to take the company apart, to leverage them into a buyout, and often this buyout on the terms of this deal is going to be more strategic towards this larger company because of the predatory nature and all the incentives that I discussed earlier. That just proves that even if the buyouts happen in the ops world, it is unlikely to be fair or good to these smaller companies. Secondly, why do we think this is really, really terrible, right? I've already talked about why the share price is not going to be good. But the second thing is that this is going to be really, really bad for the companies and the individuals working in that company themselves. So larger companies that step in, that buy out your smaller company, are going to strip your smaller company, put the existing people in this team on existing project within the company, and just basically throw whatever you're working on apart, right? Like Disney buying out smaller animation companies because people tend to sack entertainment, and these smaller animation companies are hit the hardest. You take the animators in those smaller companies, put them on other existing projects, and drop whatever these smaller companies were working on. But also, you have a lot of unneeded labor. There's a lot of redundancy as well, right? You already have a financial department that does invoicing. You already have a marketing department that does marketing. All these are people that are made redundant, and larger companies are just likely to toss them by the wayside because they don't need them. And these are people that lose their jobs, whereas in the comparative, they're more likely to keep it as this company tries to survive. The second thing we'll say, or the third thing rather, is that this is bad for the economy as a whole. One, because it kills competition. Because it's like biotech companies, right? Biotech companies that Pfizer is trying to buy out so that they can win the vaccine race. In a world where these smaller biotech companies were not bought out by larger pharma companies, if they are able to develop technology to find a vaccine, they can choose which pharma company they want to sell it to and use this competition to leverage these companies against each other. You don't have competition like this when your entire supply chain is vertically integrated, everything is done in-house, and that's why these companies again use it to further increase their profits and market these essential goods to people at a time where they really, really need things like vaccine. You force price competition to force them to lower prices. Vertical integration prevents all of this. This is worse for affordability for these essential goods. But secondly, you kill things like innovation because if larger companies take small firms apart, these smaller firms are going to be less motivated, are going to be less interested in finding new ways to do things because they just want to follow the business plan that the managers give them. Whereas on the comparative, in our world, they're more likely to seek out innovation, transition to different technological tool chains to try to survive in this economy. Our startups and SMEs have always been a key part of finding innovation, finding different market disruption technologies in order to compete against larger companies, and we need them to continue existing after the crisis exists to compete with larger companies and prevent the consolidation of power. Post-crisis recovery is a lot harder for these companies to compete basically if there isn't any competition, if there isn't any innovation to do all the things like that. Finally then here, what does the retention of companies look like? I think I already discussed all the ways in which these smaller companies can try to transition, but I think what's more likely to happen is that they're more likely to adapt and find different ways to survive in this crisis, and these innovative technologies means number one, these companies tend to survive, can compete against larger companies, but number two, they find different ways and different technologies that make the life of people so much better. For all of those reasons, the mergers during these times of crisis are incredibly predatory, but more importantly hurt competition and crisis recovery. We're very happy to propose.
Hello.
be starting in. Oh yeah, for POIs, just don't say POI. I don't like it. Just, stand up. Thank you. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Go. Coming from opposition, we agree that these businesses are the lifeblood of the economy, and the only path to recovery is by keeping these businesses alive. But what we don't agree with coming from opposition is that these companies have the capacity to recover, have the capacity to innovate, and have the capacity to do any of these things at the point in which they are failing and they are already in a recession. A couple pieces of framing just to settle this debate, because the large case coming from government is highly assumptive. They assume that they can suddenly innovate, they can suddenly do all of these things when you are already in a recession. I think this is far worse off on their side at the point in which you don't have capital and you don't have any of these things. Couple characterizations then. One, what does an economic crisis look like? And this is important to note because this is the exact time place in which these companies exist in, where you can assume that they can innovate, right? So it looks like a recession wherein businesses are closing down, jobs are being lost, and the supply of goods is decreasing at a rapid rate. Why do businesses fail at this point in time? One, because of the mismanagement which makes them vulnerable to economic crises at the point in which they are not managing goods effectively and they're doing things that are necessarily bad for the business. Secondarily, because of a lack of capital to keep things running in the first place. But also third, and most importantly, these businesses do not have the capacity to I want to know that these businesses are probably going to try to innovate and try to survive already. Therefore, your whole benefit of innovating probably already exists on our side. This debate exists at the point in which these companies have failed to innovate and have failed to do any of these things in the first place. Therefore, your benefit is not necessarily exclusive. This already exists on our side. We're debating at the point in which they are forced to close down and they have no other alternative. The alternative on your side is maybe bailing them out or letting them close down in the first place. Therefore, the harms still exist. You still have to address how you're able to prevent them from closing down, apart from just telling them to innovate, which also exists on our side, right? This is where the larger debate exists then. Yes?
We gave you 3 reasons as to why investors would prefer to sell out rather than to stay, which means that more sell-outs happen in your world rather than ours.
Right, so if investors are forced to sell out, that's probably because they don't know how to innovate or they don't know how to do any of these things anymore. But most importantly, if you force them to innovate, they're probably not going to want to in the first place if their first thought is like, oh, I want to sell out. These investors, if they already don't have the incentive to run the business, I don't see why innovation is likely at the point in which they want to give up already. So I don't see why that benefit is likely to happen on your side. We proved to you why it's likely on our side then on the comparative. So why then, okay, first then, in this debate, we will prove to you that one, why it's likely to make things worse off on their side at the point in which you ban all of it, like just flat out all of it. Maybe on our side we can stop like the most contentious ones, wherein competition could be stifled, like the Activision Blizzard acquisition, wherein like the monopoly was created. We can probably allow smaller acquisitions, which allow these businesses to survive. So maybe we can allow for some mergers and acquisitions, but we won't be banning a flat out all of it. So first argument then on why does it make things worse off for their side then. So what happens when mergers or acquisitions don't happen or we ban all of these things in the first place? I think that these two scenarios could come up. One, they either close down, and this is with regards to businesses, they either close down entirely because they don't get cash injections, or comparatively, they get cash injections from the government to bail them out of these things. And this is the exact thing that they were trying to push forward, right? So what happens when they close down and they don't get any cash injections? Because I want to know, there are going to be a lot of businesses that are going to be closing down in the first place because you can't necessarily dole out cash to every single business. So they can't help all of these things in the first place. So there's a guarantee that some businesses will close down. What happens when they do close down? One, everyone working for these companies will necessarily lose jobs and they can't have the opportunity to recover from this because they don't have any other alternative. Secondarily, there's probably going to be less supply of goods as a result of this. Particularly because again, these businesses close down. There's less ability for them to do so. Third, there's probably going to be far less competition because there's less businesses competing with one another to drive these prices down in the first place, which is exactly the harm that they were trying to push forward. What is the other thing that could happen, which is the point at which which is then the side at which they are going to be potentially bailed out by the government. Generally speaking, we agree that bailout is possible and that we agree that bailout is good. But we argue to you that we would much rather have this bailout money given to citizens in the form of stipend and all of these things, because these things are still absolutely necessary for the people on the ground to survive in the first place, because they need to be able to afford goods. The point at which you are forced to bail out companies as the government is the point at which you decrease that capital and you increase that capital base in order to provide these people in the first place. This is why it's so much more harmful on their side, because on the first place, people lose jobs. Secondarily, these people are going to have a lot less capital or purchasing power on their side at the point in which you decrease their stipend then, or the stimulus packages then from the government, which then makes the quality of life far worse on their side, but most importantly, puts the people on the lower echelons of society at the worst case, because they're then forced to survive by their own means without help from the government then. This proves to you overall why it's so much worse off on the business end for these businesses to close down for these businesses to close down, but also secondarily on the individual level, why it's so much worse off for these people then. So how then do we mitigate it on our side? How then do we mitigate this on our side by not banning it in general? Well, we tell you that capital injections means businesses don't close down and we preserve the jobs. These capital injections are likely to come in the form of mergers or acquisitions, which comes from these larger companies, which are going to fund these smaller companies necessarily at the point in which they are now a part of them or now acquired by them in the first place. And this capital injection, I want to note, does not have to come from the government, which allows us to have a larger base of capital to provide stipends or stimulus for the people in society in the first place, which then solves that problem that they have on their side. Secondarily, we have an alternative to resuscitate that company besides a government bailout, and this also means a change in leadership necessarily, which means that these companies now have a greater ability to shift dynamics and to maybe innovate because they are now part of a larger company that has smarter people, have smarter people who can run the business, and have the greater ability to make this business thrive in the first place. Therefore, if you want to argue for innovation, maybe it's possible on their side, but we argue to you that the possibility for innovation is far greater on our side when you have more capital, when you have more human capital who are smarter and who are more able to run a business that are resilient to economic crises. Final thing that I want to prove then, how do you recover from an economic crisis? And this will, this will prove to you how we get out of the recession in the first place. I want to note that government cannot solve the recession because they are not solving the root cause of why it is happening in the first place, which is more often than not an issue of supply. So for example, this looks like banks closing down, therefore taking away money or capital. This looks like food industries closing down, taking away important supply chain goods that necessarily feed the people and all these things. Recessions happen because there's a lack of supply all in all. How do we solve the problem of supply in the first place? One, we inject money so that these smaller businesses can run and keep the economy running from these smaller levels for these medium enterprises, and we allow these people to necessarily interact with the economy when you have higher stimulus packages from the government, which allows them to interact with these smaller businesses to a greater degree, further reviving the economy at the point in which we allow this to happen. This cannot happen on their side because on their side they assume that maybe these businesses could survive, maybe this could happen, but also they also assume that people will have capital to suddenly make these businesses run in the first place. I think all of it is highly assumptive and doesn't necessarily address any of these problems in the first place. Secondarily, we change the leadership that necessarily led to the failure of this business in the first place. Look, if these investors are so bad and their first option is to close down, I don't think forcing them to stay there and make that business run will necessarily be effective. That's like telling someone who doesn't want to be the president to rule a country in the first place. That's impossible. You're just assuming that this is possible in the first place. Forcing them is not a good mechanism. It just forces them to run the business badly and forces them to crash further, maybe even forcing more employees to leave. On the comparative, lastly, on jobs, they say that if they are acquired, sure, some jobs will be redundant. At the very least, we preserve some jobs, and at the very least, we protect people. On our side, we save the economy. On our side, we save people. Oppose.
Sorry, just give me a moment to get my pen. Alright, panels ready? Alright, excellent. The main problem with this particular opposition bench is that they fail to recognize who we're talking about. We agree that inefficient firms will likely fail on both sides of the house. The problem here is TJ gives you, like, the question is then, why exactly would large companies buy out inefficient firms? In a time when you are not certain that investments will create returns in times of economic crisis, odds are if a firm is so inefficient to the point of failure, it will not even be bought out anyway. This debate therefore is specifically about firms which have already innovated, firms which are capable, which have capable leadership, but have shareholders who do not want to take risks in times of crisis. Note that leadership and shareholders are different. The lack of econs knowledge from first op cannot win them this debate. Therefore, 3 questions. Firstly, whether or not small companies are likely to fail on either side of the house. Secondly, which actually improves the economy. And thirdly, just a couple of extraneous rebuttals. Firstly, on which companies are likely to fail. Opposition tells us that generally speaking, the reason why these companies fail in the first place or are being bought out in the first place is because they are inefficient firms. They have terrible leadership. dumb people apparently in charge of the company. The problem here is that if that were true, then they wouldn't be bought out. Why would you spend massive amounts of money then leveraging a company to buy over someone who is inefficient and not innovative? TJ tells you that there are a lot of instances where you can have an innovative company being bought up. Why is this the case? Because companies can do things like leverage their massive capital to demand returns on loans early on. The violent tactics that companies and corporations do all the time to manage to push for mergers and acquisitions, even if the company was doing just fine anyway. The fact that shareholders are now more risk averse during times of crisis and therefore want to have their capital on hand rather than relying on companies which might or might not fail in the future. The fact that other companies might be being sought out and merged as well, and therefore you want to follow the trend. All of this ultimately means that even efficient companies on their side of the house are necessarily the ones being bought up. Notice that these efficient firms are the ones that are oftentimes the ones which are super important for us to keep in times of crisis. TJ tells you a couple of no thank you of reasons why this is the case. The first is that the firms are not necessarily failing because states often subsidize them, because states are the ones providing them with the resources to be able to continue being afloat. Op tells us, Op doesn't rebut this. They said it's a bad thing that they're doing it. But if it is true that the state does this, then the firms aren't failing and our harms don't manifest. But why is it a good thing that firms are doing this, right? Or states are doing this? We would argue that it's a good thing because the money that you give to a firm translates to a wage for the people working in the firm. So it's not like we're giving out, it's not like we're not spending the money on willy-nilly, right? Presumably, if these firms stay afloat, they continue doing economic activities which produce goods and services, some of the output of which goes to workers, which then keeps them afloat as well. We help people tangibly on our side as well. The second thing we told you was on innovation and how these are the firms which are necessarily innovative. Notice that buyouts happen after innovation happens, right? So no, thank you. You don't buy out a company because you think it might produce a COVID vaccine. You buy them after they've already produced the COVID vaccine and you want the patent property that the company holds. That ultimately means that on their side of the house, they don't create innovation, they predate off it. They predate off it such that they can jack up prices, mine consumers who need a vaccine or they'll die. All of these are individuals which are the most vulnerable people on their side of the house that they're necessarily neglecting. Sit down. All of this ultimately means that their side of the house stymies innovation far more rather than helping it. But let's say our worst case scenario. Let's say companies fail as a whole. Why is this not the worst thing in the world? What happens when a company fails? When it starts defaulting its loans to banks, etc., banks are able to acquire the property of the company. This means that banks are then slowly partitioning the property of the company out towards multiple firms on our side of the house. Now, that they seem like a smart team. They might say that, hey, wouldn't this also lead to some level of monopoly? Perhaps, but the comparative is that it is passed out towards multiple other companies rather than all bought up by one company. So in our worst case scenario, where companies and efficient firms for some reason do fail, it leads to our worst case situation of an oligopoly or multiple firms still competing with each other as compared to complete market dominance on their side of the house. The end consequence of this clash is simply that they do not get more innovation. They stymie it. They are not saving companies that are failing. They're taking over companies that were doing well anyway, but now being predated upon by other companies.
Who do you think has the ability to produce more vaccines for a cheaper price? Pfizer has multiple factories, or biotech, which has one research facility?
Actually, I'm going to move into that actually. So TJ doesn't tell you that the biotech is going to produce the vaccines. That's dumb. He tells you that they are selling the patents and selling the patents to other corporations for a fair price, or working and cooperating with manufacturing firms that are doing all of these things in order to produce decently affordable vaccines, as compared to only one company controlling the entire production chain, which can then jack up prices as a result. So that's just not our argument. Don't try to misrep us. So moving on to the second part, which improves the economy. So notice that TJ gives you structural reasons why the monopolies formed at this point in time are so crucial and so dangerous to economic recovery. The very basic secondary school economic stuff, right? The idea that when you actually create more monopolies, then companies are able to predate more consumers to the point at which they no longer have to drive down their prices. They're able to jack up prices, and when it comes to especially dangerous things like medicine and healthcare, these are companies that are able to jack up prices that then exclude the most vulnerable from these services. This hurts crisis recovery because the more people are dead and sick, the less you can get out of a crisis. That's super intuitive, right? But also, they don't have to innovate anymore. Think about it. Why spend money innovating when you can capture market share and just keep selling the shit you have, right? The consequence of that is that these companies which need to innovate, need to produce new services that can create efficiency and help improve the economy, especially to move your state or even move your country out of a economic crisis. These are necessarily companies that are no longer going to do so and no longer going to improve the state of lives of your people. All of this ultimately means that innovation happens worse on their side. They had no response to this at this point in time, other than to say that the companies were shit anyway. But my first issue already tackled that anyway. But then the sort of secondary response to this was that large companies have more capital and therefore are able to innovate. That might be true, but they don't prove the incentive to innovate on their side of the house. If you're a corporation and you have the capacity to innovate, we can make a quick buck by just selling the same stuff you have, by capturing more market share, by capturing larger amounts of the vertical chain. All of this ultimately is that you're not going to innovate in their world. But then they told us that the leadership of this company is dumb. These are individuals who are incompetent. They ran the company to the ground anyway. If that were true, then no one would buy them. But furthermore, a lot of the times, the leadership of companies which are being bought over are not the ones who run the company. It's the shareholders who are the ones selling and buying stocks, and the vice presidents and presidents and boards of directors which are the ones who are running the company. That's just the inefficiency on their side. The last thing I want to flag is their stance, and this is something they might try and fall back on because it's a soft stance and they might give them an out. They tell us that generally speaking, they allow some mergers. The structural reason why this is untenable in this debate is because if they allow some mergers, states are inefficient in deciding which ones. It takes a massive amount of time to decide whether or not to respond to a merger or not. Companies can lobby the state then, and then sue the state, and create long drawn-out court cases to prevent or encourage them. On our side of the house, we just give a blanket ban. It's far easier to then implement on our side of the house. The lack of ambiguity allows us to actually implement it. Don't let them get away with defending this soft stance. They have to defend their reasonable burden in this debate. That is to say, to allow for mergers as a whole. And we've already told you why they're terrible. So proud to propose. Thank you.
Yellow.
Before we discuss things like innovation, let's not forget that we are in an economic crisis where people are actively losing their jobs, where their livelihoods are at stake, where if they get fired, they can access things like health insurance or even pay for their basic necessities, and that is the world that exists on our side. What government is trying to do is paint a far-long future of hopes of innovation, but we cannot reach that point if people are unable to live their daily lives or access these things or even re-stimulate the economy with purchasing power. And I think it's highly dismissive of them to ignore that coming from Mezen, and I'm gonna prove to you why it's important. Number one, I'll prove to you why it's more how we mitigate the effects of an economic crisis and how we recover. Responses will be integrated. The first question I want to answer then is who exactly is likely to get bailed out, or who exactly is likely to be, what are the firms that are likely to be parts of mergers or acquisitions, and why is it likely for it to be like companies who are likely failing? What did they say exactly? They say it's unlikely for these companies who are failing because companies won't invest in bad companies, or they're smart enough not to waste their dollars or whatever. The first response I have to this is simple. Number one, I don't think that's true, because you can still see potential in a company. You can recognize that they're under bad leadership, but you can see the potential in their innovation or in their investment. They're just run poorly, or in their investments haven't been good. But if you see that they are on the track to developing a vaccine, or they're developing a new kind of ChatGPT or whatever, you're still likely to invest in it simply because as a company you want to grow things like your market share, or you see the possibility for innovation. So it's highly likely that even inefficient companies are likely to be invested in. So this means that the potential of change where you have to get good leaders in order to get innovation is highly likely on our side. So Mezen's arguments on like how you get better leaders, therefore get innovation, still stands. The second point of if it is still good leaders or companies who are still if it is still good leaders or these companies are efficient but feel forced to sell out, why then should we still allow this to happen? A few key reasons that they didn't respond to. Number one, we tell you that if you force people to remain in these positions as leadership, they're likely to do the bare minimum. Why is this harmful? Number one, if they do not want to be there, if they're simply trying to stay afloat, then it's unlikely that innovation will even happen because they have no incentive to want to remain to the company. They no longer want to remain there. They want it to fail in the worst case, or even then they want to pass their position on to others. I'm unsure as to why they are likely to continue to be good leaders and stipend the innovation for you. The second thing is they have zero confidence in their company. This means that they already don't see the potential for growth. The fact that you ban them from being able to access a better opportunity already means that they are likely resentful of the company or see it as a dead weight in their portfolio or in their lives. So they are more likely likely to take riskier decisions or lead to bad things that prevent innovation, thus preventing the company from growing. If innovation was their best case, on their side they harm it with bad leaders. On our side, the comparative is if they really wanted to sell and they were bought by a company who's already good and established in the industry, then at least you're more likely to get innovation because that company actually wants to run that product at the end of the day. But go.
So you just wasted the last 2 minutes of your speech because shareholders are the ones selling and buying, but shareholders are not vice presidents and presidents. It's a different group of people, yeah?
No, but they'll still but at the end of the day, it's still presidents who are running the company. They're still likely to make bad decisions. If shareholders also want to abandon the company, that's why they concede to selling and merging in the first place, then those things are also likely to happen in the first place. But secondly, what did they say on their side? This is where I want to tackle the response on, governments will have stimulus or will have bailouts. Number one, I think the reason why government bailouts are insufficient on their side is because these things are the bare minimum. It's just enough to keep the company running. The problem is, if you want to do things like innovate, have progress, you need more than the bare minimum. You need constant injection of cash. You need constant capital to be injected within the company. If shareholders no longer think that it is profitable, number one, but number two, they just don't want to inject money because you're in the middle of a crisis, I'm unsure as to why this company is likely to get innovation. On the comparative, if you have a company that sees the potential and wants to merger with you or like get your company, then they're more likely to still inject cash. They're more likely to have that innovation on their side. So on the metric of innovation, we are far more likely simply because we still have the capital to innovate in the first place. But number two, we have people who are willing and able to run these things through a crisis because they are part of conglomerates who have experienced this before, who have the proper training, whereas leaderships who are still investing in startups or other of these things probably don't have the capacity to weather the storm. The second extension I then want to talk about, this is far more important, is talking about how we mitigate the effects of the economic crisis. Because I want to say, their points on monopoly or innovation are not important to people on the ground level, because as a neutral observer, these things are far away from your proximity. But what you do care about is your ability to access a job, your ability to go to work every day, and all of that is lost on government side because businesses are likely to fail because it is an economic crisis. This means the cost of goods is extremely expensive. If you are running a company, buying and maintaining in the industry is difficult because things like supply chains cost a lot of money. If even the big firms are having difficulty, what more you, a small enterprise, in running the company? What does this mean then if businesses are likely to fail? It means jobs are likely to be lost. No more. The closure of firms is highly likely, or people are unable to go to work. So, people, or their ability to work, their ability to stimulate the economy because they have money now, they are able to access these things or continuously buy goods because they have a salary, or their ability to, if they get sick, access proper healthcare is lost on their side. And this is so important for the neutral observer because this is literally their lives. They don't care about the monopoly or of the innovation insofar as they are starving, they are cold, they are freezing, they're unable to access their basic necessities because they do not have a job. The comparative is, if you allow mergers and acquisitions, you allow more people to keep their jobs because they're still just going to be under a company. They're still going to be able to have a job and access these things. I would suggest that it is even better on our side that they do get some benefits precisely because the company at least wants to run them, or they have enough capital for them to pay all of these things and not just rely on state stipend. This is important for two reasons. Number one, for the people who still have a job, it means they can access their basic necessities because they have the things like salary. But in the worst case where we acknowledge that some businesses will fail, it means that the state no longer has to continuously just bail out companies as their only default mechanism for keeping up jobs, but they can reallocate those funds into actually protecting the people who do not have jobs. So they can actually re-stimulate the economy. So this proves to you why even in the long run on our side, we're able to mitigate the crisis better because we have more tools that we can use. We can allow private entities to help stimulate the economy with mergers and acquisitions, with injecting cash and innovations. All of their benefits are possible on our side. But what is exclusive and what wins us debate and what is far more central to people is their ability to access a livelihood, their ability to weather the crisis. Because if they cannot weather this crisis, if they are left homeless and everything else, it is far harder for them to recover. They do not get their innovation when people are dying in the cold and people are starving due to their inability to fund themselves. Thanks.
translator didn't pronounce if you just POI is how you want to POI. I don't care. I'm going to answer 3 issues in this debate. The first, do small companies have a shot in a recession? The second, who has the ability to increase competition? Because it seems like Gov wants to have their cake and eat it too. They can't. Lastly, who gets more goods and services and why, even if they do, we are willing to take the trade-off? 1, can small companies have a shot? Answering this question is important because it shows that we have access to the benefits of small companies. So things like increase in innovation, for example, the fact that these small companies often want to get a piece of the market share and a piece of the pie. I think very simply, LO says there are mismanagement, they attempt to innovate, and these are companies who are bound to shut down. These are bad companies. I'm just not sure specifically. I just want to point out in first speaker, they were like, one of the major problems is mismanagement. Hi guys, I don't care how good your product is if you are mismanaged anyways, the potential for certain things also is unlikely to accrue. Anyways, on the other side of the house, so you'll be shut down for parts, yes, and they're less efficient. These companies will not be bought. From first 2 speakers never responded to. The counterfactual is that we liquidate their assets, in which case we allow the state to claim some level of loss. That's still perfectly fine. The alternative here is 2 things. On our side, 1, we tell you that companies have a shot because the USA already has spaces that attempt innovation. So things like, for example, the Silicon Valley, for example, which has high levels of innovation and high levels of SMEs, for example. Number 2, because its opposition says we can still have some level of capital injections, which is not mutually exclusive. First speaker tries to make it mutually exclusive. It's not, because if they can have capital injections into the big companies, we can have capital injections to these small companies. So if they want the benefit of capital injections to the big companies, they already have capital to begin with. That's bizarre. So therefore, on our side of the house, that's when we're able to have capital injections to help these small companies stay afloat, which makes it easier anyways because they're smaller companies. Second thing I'm going to point out here. Who has the ability to increase competition? Because they say a lot of businesses will close. So answering this question will show 2 things. Number 1, what happens after a recession, because recessions don't last forever. Number 2, whether they are able to keep them afloat. I want to note that there is a tenuous link from mergers to their benefits. That is to say, they say when there's a merger, there is magically more hiring, more things happening, and more innovation. I'm unsure why, because in debates you need to prove solvency as well. The COVID crisis cannot only exist on government, right? So these same problems they talk about infrastructurally also has to exist on their side of the house. Why is this important, right? Because what this response does is to point out the same issues of low capital flow that exist within these big companies as well, so they can't afford to pay their big companies. Why is this important? Because Apple or Boeing, for example, also took a hit from COVID. So if you want capital returns, have fun with that in a recession. But more importantly, the second speaker's biggest argument was the possibility for innovation. This is when I realized that they are super flip-floppy in their stance, because all the stuff about uncertainty, loss of jobs, loss of innovation, and yet they're okay with taking a risk and a jump towards a company severely mismanaged with no potential whatsoever, with a glimmering of hope that is both diametrically opposed. You cannot have that ability to go, I really like this company with some level of potential with no mismanagement, but simultaneously say that this is a COVID crisis. Therefore, this is extremely bizarre. I don't think they can win this clash. What was our alternative? We told you, what are the harms of this? Number 1, the integration that happens means that you violate their ability to have, the integration that happens means that the way in which companies merge is that a lot of upper management, middle management gets removed because Disney does not need another accountant. Therefore, you have higher loss of jobs. Second speaker loves to tout, but what about the homeless people? You're all in the streets, cold and dying. Yeah, you know what else is also cold and dying? All the 50 accountants they just got laid off from the small company. Yeah, those are also cold and dying. The 60 animators they just got laid off because BoJack Horseman got discontinued and BoJack Horseman got thrown away. It's also dying in the corner and crying in the streets. Yeah. So if you talk about cold dying individuals, they also have it worse on their side of the house. Number 2, if you buy on something because of a project, you strip it for parts. This is the most crucial thing from TJ that was never responded to, right? Why is this response important? Because we told you why small companies' innovations are so important in the long term. COVID crisis is not the only context that this exists. It's after COVID crisis. Economies go through boom and bane, right? This is currently a bane. We are currently going through an economic upward trend in terms of COVID, right? Therefore, the way in which economic crisis happens is after COVID. What happens then? What happens on their side of the house is a company which necessarily strips its other companies for parts. Right? The reason why BoJack Horseman got discontinued is because, well, it's not really making money for us anymore. We're going to shove it to Netflix projects, right? The reason why in bigger companies like biotech, after they get the vaccine or after they get like insulin, for example, they're like, we can just sit back and relax because, well, we don't have to. There comes a point, right? In high school economics, you learn this as well, is where like innovation becomes counterproductive. But innovation becomes something that you shouldn't do because in doing so, the money pumped in there doesn't supersede your ability to, doesn't supersede your profits. That is to say, no. That is to say that insofar as like bigger companies already have their cash cow, I'm not sure why they're going to put in more money because that money wouldn't have the same proportion of yield anyway versus shoving it towards their cash cow. Oh, the last thing I want to point out here. They say, but supply chains. Pfizer very big. Pfizer got a lot of supply chain. Pfizer insulin and COVID-19 prices still very high. The decrease in supply chain is just a decrease in cost for the company, not for the average individual. This is important because but we get more affordable COVID vaccines. No. Yeah, not really, because it just increases the profit margins for that particular company. It decreases your ability to afford them. This leads me to my third question: who gets more goods and services, right? So on our side, we told you a few things. Number one, we're able to fund smaller companies, which allows for them to continue their innovation that lasts into the long term. Number two, the way in which small companies compete, right? And the implicit assumption here seems to be small companies want to fail. No, they don't, right? Like most small companies, because of shareholders, as Ian points out to you, most small companies, because of things like, for example, the fact that this is a passion project, or the fact they just want to make it in the market, have to innovate because they don't have their cash cow. They're finding their cash cow right now. Therefore, there's a high incentive for smaller companies to want to innovate in the long term. So on our side of the house, sure, the trade-off we make here is that in the short term, some of these companies fail, but they're inefficient anyways, and also they infringe small number of companies that could have been, right, we're perfectly willing to trade it off if it means that bigger companies still get grants and still get stuff anyways. On the other side of the house, even if it's true they get more COVID vaccines because like biotech gets bought up, then there's a high increase in price because of the monopolistic competition that happens, but number two, you're able to do so because there's no other competition in the long term, preventing other startups from happening, but also preventing the innovation from being able to be exceeded in the first place. For all these reasons and more, very proud to be on GAF.
Okay. 3, 2, 1. I want to clarify that this golf team does not understand the burdens that this motion has, because they are supposed to defend all mergers and acquisitions, not just the efficient companies. We are supposed to defend some mergers and acquisitions from happening, and not necessarily make sure that every merger and acquisition happens. I'm going to do two issues in this debate. The first thing is, how do we mitigate the effects of the crisis? Secondly, how do we recover from the crisis? And that second part is so crucial because if they're going to bank their case on the long-term benefits, they do not get access to that unless they show us how do they get out of the recession. We're the only team to do that in the first place. But firstly, how do we mitigate the effects of the recession? I'm going to do four things into this issue. Firstly, I'm going to show why our harm flies. Secondly, I'm going to weigh why our harm is more important than theirs. Then thirdly, I'm going to talk about monopolies and why they're worse on their side. Firstly, why does our harm fly? We told you that businesses are likely to close down. That means workers lose jobs and prices increase. And we tell you that the mechanism of bailouts only make people worse off because you remove from the pie that could be given to social welfare and the like. What was their response? Number one, they said that the companies they're gonna merge anyway are the companies that are unlikely to fail. We tell you that's untrue. Mostly, these companies, even if they're likely to fail, will still be bought up or will still be merged and acquired because they still have assets, they still have market share, and they still have so much things and potential that just needs a leadership change in order to function. And most crucially, Mezen's characterization was, it is these companies that are crucial to the economy to run. These are banks. These are food industries. Meaning, the way that they are run right now sucks. But in order for us to recover for the economy, their potential is limitless. Meaning, it is not just those efficient companies they're talking about, it is these inefficient companies that badly need so. Then they try to mitigate it and say, hey, there's still going to be layoffs that exist. But sure, that will happen. We will maybe lay off some 50 accountants, but on their side, they lay off the accountants, the lawyers, the janitors, and every single person that is literally in that company. They do not get that benefit. How then do we weigh this? The first thing is on the certainty of the harm. Because if they argue that monopolies are so harmful, or the lack of innovation is so harmful, we tell you that the jobs are already more likely to happen, are as already happening at the end of the day. But their mechanism of monopolies harming people, or of it happening, is still up in the air. We still don't even know what type of monopoly even looks like in the first place. We still don't even know, for example, how exactly it will harm the people. At best, they just said it will just jack up the prices, but I think that's just one part of what the monopoly can do. Sure, KY.
Look, bad companies will fail and not be bought out under both sides of the house. We never expect you to do that. You have to engage with companies that could be good and compete, but instead investors choose to chicken out and sell out because they don't want to take the risk.
No. You can't just pick and choose what type of mergers and acquisitions. We tell you bad companies still have assets, still have potential. We told you they are so crucial to the economy that the economy fails without them. So, like banks, banks. Anyway, so the second thing is, the first thing is the certainty of the harm. The second thing is on the scale of the harm. So maybe some people might benefit or might be worse off in a monopoly, and that's just one industry, or maybe better off with innovation. And that's just a specific group of people. But on the comparison on our side, when the recession continues growing and continues happening, the harm is literally everyone in the economy versus some people that are hurt over that monopoly. So I'm unsure why exactly that monopoly is such a big harm at the end of the day. So then let's mitigate the monopoly harm. Firstly, it's not as bad as they think. If they think that it is really an egregious case, I think the FTC literally still exists to ban, for example, super duper bad monopolies. They're still like that. But even if the monopolies do happen, I think governments can take the trade-off. We can take the trade-off. Maybe monopolies will happen, but we recognize that the priority is for people to eat right now, for people to not lose their jobs, for people to continuously run the economy as compared to the maybe long-term harm that's happening. And here's where we flip it. Because maybe on our side, we create a long-term monopoly, as they said. And that's better for us to break up in the future because we still have a capacity to break up monopolies. But on their side, when those monopolies happen, because other businesses fail, it is much, much harder to create a competitor to Disney rather than breaking up Disney in the future. So we flip that and we ensure that if it was about monopolies, other companies dying only makes their monopolies worse off because you prevent the mergers and acquisitions happening. So we win this specific issue because number one, we show you the most pressing problem right now in the debate, which is the crisis. And number two, we even flip their harm and we even weigh it at the end of the day. Secondly, where do we recover from the crisis? And let's talk about innovation. I think it was pretty clear from my first speaker that they do not recover from the crisis because these companies that are failing, are likely to fail, are failing, usually cause the recessions, such as banks and so on, because they're so integrated in the economy. Our solution to make sure that that we get out of the recession was so we pump money into those industries that are failing. The banks, for example, the food industry, for example. And secondly, we changed their leadership by allowing these mergers and acquisitions from happening to prevent the mismanagement that has already happened. Meaning, the recession will continuously happen on their side if you just bail out the same people that caused the recession in the first place. They do not get out of that. Furthermore, if we talk about innovation, we're far more better than that. Because maybe they say they have more innovation. But our point was, we are able to distribute that innovation. If they're talking about the Pfizer and the biotech example, I think the reason why we would rather prefer the Pfizer compared to the biotech is biotech would have to spend costs on running factories from the ground up compared to the economies of scale that Pfizer already has. So if both sides want the COVID vaccine, we are much more closer and faster in doing that and much more cheaper because biotech has to work from the ground up and biotech has to work from the ground up compared to Pfizer who already has those at the end of the day. This is so crucial to the round and they did not properly respond to this for three reasons. The first reason is because The first reason is because we already told you that the harms of the recession are so harmful. If we do not recover from it, the harms, the impact is times 5, times 10, because the harm continuously happens and happens at the end of the day. Furthermore, if they argue that they want access to the long-term benefits of monopolies and the like, they do not even get the long-term benefits because we do not get out of the crisis in the first place. Meaning, that restricts the access to all their benefits, that restricts the access to all their benefits in the round. And the last reason why recovering from the crisis is so much more crucial, in the round, is basically all of our weighing, why exactly is it that this is so bad for the people at the end of the day. So at the end of this debate, I think it's pretty clear that it's just about mechanisms of how do we mitigate the worst parts of it and how to recover, and the opposition dealt with that. The government team needs to engage in our characterization.
Thanks, Alfred. Close the debate for all reply.
Three, two, one, go. This debate is in the view of an average reasonable person and general society. The case coming from government argues to you coming from an ivory tower, telling you that innovation is good, competition is bad, all of these things are so harmful. This is the exact harm that they fall into because it's not something that sells to the average reasonable person. What's more proximate to them is the immediate harm that they can be affected by, whether or not they are homeless, whether or not they can live, whether or not they can afford food. What government does to that is laugh in the face of it and tell you that it's okay, because even if they are merged, they're still going to lose some jobs. What we provide to you is that we guarantee that even if some people are going to lose jobs, there are some people who are still going to maintain those jobs. On their side, they have to concede to the fact that everyone's going to lose jobs at the point in which no one's going to be merged and these businesses are forced to fail in the first place, right? This is the immediate harm that we prove to you, but most importantly, this is the most proximate harm that they have to deal with, and they fail to do that. The most they do is mitigate it and dismiss it after that. One thing I want to clarify first then, before I move into everything else. They argue to us that we cannot pick and choose, that we cannot necessarily just say we're going to ban some and not do anything else, right? I think this is the exact thing that they fall into. They argue to you that they want to ban all mergers and acquisitions because some of them could be bad at the point in which it could be predatory and all of that, right? We told you that we can ban these exact types of mergers and acquisitions, and they tell us that we don't have the capacity to do that. Look, as an average reasonable person, if a debater can point out mergers and acquisitions that can be bad, surely the FTC can do so as well. I don't see why that's necessarily something that only they can do and suddenly decide that we have to ban all of it as a result of that. There are some smaller mergers and acquisitions that Danny and Isha proved to you are still important to the economy, even if there is mismanagement and there is all of these things. Because these larger firms understand they can solve all of the problems that exist within these smaller firms at the point in which they merge and that they acquire these things in the first place. So they can't just say that we're going to limit the debate to only this specific part of the group because that's exactly convenient for them and that's exactly maybe where they win. But that's disingenuous debate and unfair, generally speaking. So they can't push that narrative. They simply fail at that. So given that, they still have to argue to the extent at which these smaller companies that are necessarily bad could still exist, and they fail to do so. The most they do is try to sidestep it. They fail. Secondarily, then, where do we help the most people? I think generally speaking, each will prove this to you to like a large degree. They don't do any defense of this. The whip just says that, just pick the accountants. Go away with it. I think for the large part, they still succumb to the harms of this. They can't defend this anymore and reply, punish them for that. Secondarily then, were you more able to recover from the economic crisis? I think generally speaking, a lot of their case is hinged on the idea that, look, we're going to have innovation, and that's necessarily going to help the economy. I don't think they necessarily solve the problems of the economic crisis. They just assume that once we acquire and once we merge and once we do all of these things, maybe the economic crisis will disappear at some point. And maybe this could be true, but we give you an actual analysis as to why we're able to speed that up and make that happen on a faster rate at the point in which we allow these businesses to operate, and we have a greater level of stipend or stimulus for the people on the ground who need this to survive, but most importantly need this to keep the economy running, which is the actual mechanism to revive an economy. On their side, they just assume that, look, mergers and acquisitions, bad, that's how we save the economic crisis, that's how we prevent a recession. That doesn't happen on their side. As an average reasonable person, that's just wrong. On our side, we gave you reasonable mechanisms, we gave you an actual centrality analysis as to why harms to people are important to people. But even if we want to concede to the debate of innovation and all of those things, we prove to you why that's not as important as opposed to the whole benefit of curing the economy of your recession. For all of these reasons, oppose.
So a very common tactic I see when teams are losing debates is to try to pretend, right, that the debate is smaller than it really is. To shrink the round to the specific case studies that they prefer and ignore material from me and from our speakers that point out why that material is not the only material in this debate. When opposition tells us that they can cherry pick which merger and acquisitions to defend in the third and reply, after which I have already spoken, and I pointed out there are some reasons why you can't. If it is the case that there is ambiguity in the wording of the law, that the FTC doesn't ban all mergers but only some, that's the point at which it takes a longer period of time to decide on these bans, etc., but B, it opens you up to lobbying and lawsuits from companies who want to merge but want to force the FTC's hand. All of this ultimately means that they don't get to cherry pick the exact example they want, but rather must debate on the range of examples in this debate or range of companies in this debate. And the moment you believe that, panel, they lose, because the range of examples are stacked against them. And that's exactly what I explained in this speech. Firstly, on jobs, and their precious argument on jobs, and the sort of sob stories that they tell us in second and third. We tell you that there are a range of companies which are being discussed in this debate. The specific actors that they want to talk about are companies which have a glimmer of potential but are under terrible leadership. And notice that the amount of resources company actually has shrinks over time. They don't actually have the patents but have the assets. What are these assets? You don't know. But when we told you that, look, if this company has potential, right, but this is an economic recession, right, then your big company doesn't want to take risks in times of economic recession. They are being hit by COVID on their side of the house as well. This means that the act of buying over a company with potential, you might do that in the time of economic boom, but not in a time of economic bust. The consequence of this, it is unlikely that these companies which are actually being bought over are the ones that are not doing so well, but are the ones with potential. Rather, we pointed out that the companies that are being bought over are the ones which have already got patents, which are already under pretty decent management and are already the ones who have a potential to expand. That's what companies do. They buy things that help them make profit. That's how companies work, right? So, the moment you realize that this debate is about efficient companies, their material falls, because all of their material about job losses and how they're preventing it relies on that company failing. But if this debate doesn't occur in this, if it is the case that companies would fail or fail on both sides, but there are companies that would succeed and thrive in our world that are being necessarily leveraged by massive companies that do specific financial tactics that TJ talks about and we push on the bench. Like, for example, demanding loans early. Like, for example, capitalizing on the fact that shareholders are now more risk averse in times of crisis. There is a trend of selling. All of this ultimately means that even efficient companies are the ones being bought over. That means that they don't save jobs, they lose them. Because once these efficient companies are bought over, they are forcibly integrated, they're stripped for parts. The individuals who just don't happen to fit into the exact projects that are being done now get laid off. That's when we flip their main impact, of which they are trading off everything else on innovation, by the way, of people losing jobs. Because those accounting departments that we talk about are then the ones losing their jobs, who would have kept their jobs in our world. Therefore, they don't win on jobs. That's the massive trade-off that they made, which they just don't even manage to trade off properly to begin with. They don't mechanize it, the trade-off doesn't matter. But second, on innovation, I find it amusing that the main thrust of opposition on innovation is to trade it off and call us ivory tower people. I'm sorry, since when was insulin and the price of a life-saving drug that if you don't get every month you die an ivory tower issue? Since when was clean water filtration and the ability of biotech companies to provide that an ivory tower issue? These are all issues which are important to everyday people as well. But furthermore, these are issues that are important to get you out of the recession. If it is the case that we are currently in a recession, we need to get out any means necessary. How do we do that? By making products and services cheap enough and accessible enough that people can benefit from them, access them, buy them, stimulate economic activity, innovate to overcome the initial conditions that cause the crisis, such as COVID, by making vaccines accessible. All of these things help move you out of the crisis. In that work, all these crises become worse as well. Then they said, but economies of scale are better. Next, we can do better things on our side with that. No, that's just not the thrust of our case as well. We already agree that these small companies can't have massive factories, but the crucial thing that they can do is choose the factories they want to work with and sell the pattern to, and therefore avoid monopolies. In their world, vertical integration means that you have a company controlling every part of the supply chain, and thus systematic monopoly. We take this debate on that grounds, so proud to propose.
Thanks everyone, and I'll Tobi.
Thank you.